Okay. procedimientos por urgencia manifiesta contratación directa.
Muy buenos días, bienvenidos a la sesión del miércoles de la 35ª reunión del Comité de Expertos. Quería darles el aviso que estamos a 5 minutos de
We are
comenzar.
5 minutes from starting. Welcome all.
Para que lo tengan en cuenta y a los
That
intérpretes
way.
estamos a 5 minutos de empezar. Gracias.
And for interpreters, we're 5 minutes from starting. Thank you.
Muy buenos días,
Good
tengan
morning
todos
for
expertos en
all experts
el comité.
in our committee. Welcome to the third day of the 35th meeting of the Committee of Experts of MESICIC, the plenary session. Today, we will be addressing point 5 on the agenda, which is the special session, Preventing and Tackling Corruption During the Pandemic, Experiences, Developments, and Lessons Learned. For this special session, we distributed, we delivered a document, and the technical secretariat received the proposals from countries who will be doing their presentation today. In order to start such an important issue where the pandemic has affected the majority of the activities that we conduct, I must inform that we have 12 countries that sent their information: Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, United States, Guatemala, Honduras, Paraguay, Mexico, Jamaica, and Uruguay. We will be listening to them throughout the morning. So we must remind you that each country has 10 minutes for their presentation. We will not be opening the Q&A portion because there are so many. Any country has any questions regarding any of the points, we can help to connect the countries so that they can ask them. And we really appreciate the technical secretariat for coming up with, for arranging this session, because in pandemics it's very important to learn of the different activities and of each, and for us to learn. We remind you all to please keep their microphones and video off, except for the moment when you are going to present. There is a request from Colombia because the director from Colombia, who will be doing the presentation, has some is occupied in the meeting this morning. So they have requested being the first to present today, and the Secretariat has accepted this request from Colombia. Without further ado, we will give the floor to Colombia by the director of Colombia Buys Efficiently. Good morning. Good morning, all. Good to be here, Mr. Cortez and Garcia, on behalf of Colombia. We're happy to be here, and we would just like to mention that we have, because of the pandemic, we have some legislative issues today. He was summoned, and I am the underdirector. And we present we apologize, but we are pre-legislative area times, and which is very important for reactivating our economy. So unfortunately, he will not be with us today. So in order to start, we would like to mention what were the actions that Colombia Compra Eficiente, which is Colombia Buys Efficiently, the activities that were implemented because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first thing that we wish to mention is that the regulations that were issued by the President of the Republic, the agency was a demand for declaring emergency. So we have had a very aggressive strategy, and it always is. Prior to that, it always has some competitive activities. So, because of the ex, times, that is why Colombia Compra Eficiente, which is our procurement office, is that this is a mechanism that is transparent, competitive, and articulated in order to have the supply so that we could have a bank of information to provide all these requirements, all these needs. We had the first stage was what we called COVID-19 emergency. That first step started with a summons on social media and the agency's webpage, summoning all the productive sector to register in a repository, presenting their what they could provide. And being a transparent public mechanism, we received more than 2,000 mechanisms, applications from all the country. We then came up with what we call our first battle front, which was a time that was no longer than 3 weeks, and we were able to operationalize this instrument, which was legal, judicial transparency. And again, after 2,000 requests, 3 weeks, we already had the first possibility of state agencies to have antibacterial alcohol and all of those provisions that were biosanitary issued by the Ministry of Health. Then, as we were requiring other goods and services, the instrument was updated and a new catalog was included. And now we have this emergency instrument. We have one of personal protective equipment, hospital expansion, technological applications. We have a catalog of disinfection, a catalog supporting the educational sector regarding the activities of public schools throughout the country. And last week, we rolled out a catalog for acquiring all the vaccination, the portable refrigerators, greater refrigerators, etc. We also have a humanitarian help, which helped to a scenario for the mandatory food to provide savings when they were purchasing. So the instrument, the scope of the instrument is national. It is divided in regions. It has price and weekly reviews of the activities, so that we can have a mathematical formula to have a lid, so that state agencies can buy with security margins. And as we all know, with the pandemic, there was speculation, people gathering things, and that's this way, week by week, we can modulate the goods and services that the state is buying to face this pandemic. And weekly, new providers can enter in any of the catalogs. Currently, we have 300 providers. It has been the state contracting with the biggest number of providers, and 90% of them are small and medium enterprises. Why? Because with this purchasing, we reduce the barriers to accessing procurement. That way, all the price formula, they can ensure a safe purchasing. This instrument has two operations. The main one is creating the proponents and finding the less price offer. And what we have asked in the technical tabs, in the technical sheets, we're trying to find the best quality. The instrument, from the moment it was created, has 262 billion pesos. We have had a savings of from 6 to 16%, and all of the departments of the agency, business, technology, and marketing, we have had more than 5,000 purchase orders, and for more or less 600 entities of the state. This is pretty much how it is comprised. The most important catalogs in the instruments. The numbers are in Colombian pesos, but you can see that there are more or less 600 providers, and then we will see. We can show you how the small and medium enterprises and the others are made up. Next. We can see how it is divided into team equipment for personal protective equipment. 92% of providers are small and medium enterprises, and the rest are follow the same idea. A citizen control tool was the second aspect. This was a tool for real-time registering the acquisition by state entities, the goods and services to face the pandemic. Here we can see how the tool is working. It's in real time with open data deriving from the transactional applications, and we can show by urgency our goods and services, and we can see the behavior by the public purchasing and how many resources the entities have to face the pandemic.
Ahí pueden encontrar el link. Tenemos una solución en Power BI.
We can see the link that can identify by contractor, amount, etc. Everything that is included in public procurement, and public procurement is universal, and we can review all the contacts that have been included, and this is monitored daily. For all of you, this is the presentation of the two tools that Colombia came up with in Colombia Compra Eficiente in a matter of transparency, efficiency. It's a pleasure to have been with you for these 10 minutes, and any questions you have at Colombia Compra Eficiente, we would be very happy to address them. And thank you, and greetings to all who are listening. Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary, for the information you have shown with the mechanism. It's very relevant in regarding public procurement, and something that calls our attention very strongly is the positive results that you have had to organize it with internet and electronic mechanisms.
Continuing with the presentations, now let's go the presentation as we've always done it in alphabetical order, and it corresponds to Brazil to present their conference. So you have the floor. Good morning, Brazil.
Good morning, Mr. President. I would like to thank for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here today, and the opportunity to present the experience according to the control, transparency, and combat towards corruption, having also the pandemic. I would like to thank the Technical Secretariat for enabling the translation of my presentation to enable the understanding by all. I had prepared a larger presentation, but because I didn't know the length of time, so I'm just going to browse quickly through the presentation, taking into consideration the time we have. First of all, talking about the CGU, General Controller of the Union, we are a body that is responsible for the internal control of the executive power, federal executive power in Brazil, conformed by different characteristics on transparency, ombudsman, combat to corruption, and also these are 5 great organs of the CGU: audit, procurement, transparency. We are more than 30 years in this format from 2003. We have representation in all the Brazilian states, and being the central body in Brasilia, the capital in Brazil. In combat to the pandemic, I would like to show that Brazil, being a very large country with a lot of municipalities and states, the only system, healthcare system in Brazil, conformed by 3 bodies: Brazil, the federal government, states and municipalities, and they all work jointly in combating the pandemic. So there's a huge decentralization of the resources to the states, to the 27 states and all the municipalities of the country, for them to do the public procurement and having the capacity of response towards the pandemic. Several direct actions were taken by the government faced with this virus and the combat towards pandemic. More than 100 million reais that were given to this emergency in the municipalities and states. Resources that were directly applied in expenditure in health, and CGU had the following dilemma. Would we take control of the situation? Would we wait until the manager responsible for the public power make their own actions? And in order then we would criticize as a controller, giving them the responsibility, or would we have a major activity, agile, to oversee this process in a better way? So we thought about the procurement and the combat towards the pandemic. That is what we decided to do. I'm going to speak very quickly of the 4 areas that we acted: corruption, inspection, ombudsman, and transparency. Transparency. Brazil has a portal of transparency of the federal government, where all the public expenditures are available towards the population. The CGU coordinates this portal of transparency. A channel was created for information and expenditures towards the COVID. Since the launching of the portal, we had a huge amount of information of what was happening in the country related to the COVID-19 and expenditures. And we had to make these actions very transparent. At the same time, we created a program of financial resources towards families and Brazilian citizens that were impacted directly by the pandemic and that they lost their jobs and other difficulties that they had due to the COVID-19. CGU faced a very important work in ombudsperson in preventive aspect, like registering all the information in order to understand these expenditures, where they going. So many were benefited with these resources. More than 180 billion in expenditures that were given to these families. It's more than 250 billion reais. And preventive work while crossing the data and the eligibility of these beneficiaries that were registered. So for the government, everybody could register and receive that benefit. And it made that 50 billion reais were identified in registered citizens and that received information, that received that money because they didn't have the conditions. This information is public. A specific channel was created in combat towards the pandemic, ombudsperson, to enable communication between the citizens and CGU for demands and other things. In audit and procurement prosecutors, I'm going to talk quickly about what we have done. There was analysis in a preventive aspect to prevent corruption acts with the contracts that were taken with the Ministry of Health, like beds and procurement of other equipment important. So to procure these items and to really give them to the other clinics and hospitals. So that was made very transparent. CGU made a preventive analysis identifying the risks that could be prevented by the manager that was observed according to this. More than 30 processes that were analyzed, $2 billion in economy in contracts that were canceled because they meant fraud or manipulation of processes on behalf of the companies. We enabled the purchase to be given with the best delivery and the length of time. Overseeing this process bundled in a high capacity of response could be highlighted during the pandemic. These are only examples of the results. Next slide, please. During the pandemic, with this purchase, decentralized purchase, and due to the high demand of products as beds and respirators, among other equipment, there was high demand of these products and a huge oscillation of price. CGU created a panel to centralize all the public purchases in all the bodies of the Union of the states and municipalities. This information, even though they're public, are very dispersed. Only the Union information are centralized. CGU centralized this public purchase, trying to give that information to the manager and to enable that this information in combat to the corruption could be built. This is public, it's available in the panel of CGU, more than 50 million items, 3 billion items acquired. These are service goods. Next slide, please. We had indicators in price, reference price, analysis of what was acquired by the population, companies that sold the most, bodies that bought the most, higher risks of the companies, and that were really having processes in procurement. So we identified those risks. And apart from transforming or this information being public, so having this better purchase of reference and items, we could see what manager was buying compared to the other. In that sense, CGU could be able to deepen in specific cases that would indicate higher risks in combat towards corruption. CGU last year, with the federal police, in actions against corruption, were more than 80 special operations in the CGU that Brazil defines as joint work in combat towards corruption.
Your time is up.
Yes, just 1 minute. To end my presentation, so we have a joint action with transparency. So this was given to the population in order to have a very transparent process. And together with the Ministry of Health, this is possible to have this information really to detain or to stop corruption, always overseeing that the public expenditure is much more efficient, and all the challenges lived by Brazil and the public bodies in Brazil in combat to corruption would be much more efficient, obtaining the best results and product delivery towards the population. Thank you very much for the invitation. We are available for any questions you may have.
Muchas gracias al representante.
Thank you very much to the representative of the General Controller for presenting this initiative in the control of public expenditure in times of pandemic, which is very important. Due to all the aids that have been invested by the different countries. Now, continuing with our presentations, we'll give the floor to the representation from Chile. Chile, good morning. Good morning, President, Chair, and thank you very much. Good morning to all of the people who are attending the webcast and here present. Today, I am as a lead expert, as a General Director of Government from Chile, to tell you which have been the measures of four institutions to mitigate the aspects that the pandemic has brought about and to combat corruption, strengthen transparency. So in this regard, we are going, next slide, please. So we will be talking about these four institutions. Two of them are autonomous and the other two from the government. So we can see what are the general measures that the state has taken. Next. I think it's going to be a general context to talk about the difficulties that we have had to all the institutions with regards to maintaining the operation of institutions during this pandemic. 2020 was a special year, very complex, especially, and very challenging to provide continuity to any service. So the four institutions we're going to refer here in Chile have an important role combating corruption and also in the efficient use of public resources. We are referring to the General Direction of Procurement, the Public Office, the Controllership of the Republic, and the Ministry of Public, where I work. I'm going to talk about the specific measures that we have taken to be able to continue complying with our role. Next, please. First of all, we're going to make reference to the Internal Auditing Council. This is the body I represent. And I have to tell you that not only that we did specific actions, but it was very important to talk to the President of the Republic about the message that the President itself, together with all the ministers and all the government authorities, should provide to the public officers. This top of the top was established in a instruction that the President provides, so the ministers and different authorities. So it was clearly stated that during the pandemic, there was an emergency, yes, but there couldn't be a lack of control. The internal control as well as external control that could be provided by the controllership's office. And this mandate from the presidency raised another government document, very important for all the government institutions, giving them instructions to officers on the first line, second line, and third line officers to do all the actions needed to ensure that it was in compliance with the legislation in general, but also in what had all the previous countries have stated in the public procurement. We have a saying in Spanish, and all the Spanish-speaking people can understand. There couldn't be, in order to provide the interpretation in English, we couldn't leave that the complications of the pandemic be opportunity for the corrupted people who would like to take advantage of. So therefore, they instructed also specific actions, assurance instructions for the public expenditure, and to all these new elements that perhaps the public services had to acquire, like EPP or PPE and gloves and gel, and also in accordance with their own purposes to be able to provide continuity to all the institutions. In the same token, there was a decree that allows, from the constitutional point of view, to have an over expenditure, and that's going to be within the assurance actions, as well as a permanent monitoring of purchases during the pandemic, and I will make a reference to in the last slide. Next slide. The General Controllership of the Republic. Many of you mentioned the General Controller in your presentations. The Controller's office is based on data. It had some difficulties and challenges during the pandemic. First of all, we can remember that all the procedures had to be strengthened regarding the channels already existing. We didn't have the public face-to-face, but the virtual channels were also had to be extended. At the same time, there were challenges regarding the protection of the health of officers, so during the remote work, but maintaining the permanent auditing presence, the continuity of the normal. Well, there's an interference. There's an open microphone, so it's interfering with the. Excuse me, I shall continue. The auditing presence that all these entities had to have, we kept it using the technological resources. Next slide. Emphasizing the adaptation of those processes to other concerns from the citizens, like the public expenditure under the context of COVID-19. Next. If we continue talking with the public office, it's not necessary to emphasize the importance it has in combating corruption. It also had some difficulties to provide continuity to the services, adapting its processes so all officers could work during the pandemic in a remote way, and also there were ethical shifts to provide face-to-face work in those specific and necessary cases. That's the way they kept the operation during their important role. Protocols were designed, sanitary protocols were designed for security of those teams that had to go face-to-face to the prosecutor's office. People who had to go to the offices. There was a strengthening of electronic platform for denounces, and we also provide greater emphasis to effectiveness of instructions, having to be adapted to work through virtual meetings between lawyers and prosecutors. All of these, of course, had lots of difficulties. For example, some meetings had to be canceled. The obligation of and there was a congestion in the judicial areas, but has been taken by our prosecutors in a very efficient way. As always, we end with what we started, the public procurement. What we called the Civicompra had to be adapted also in this pandemic period. We had orders, there were changes in the recommendations trying to strengthen efficiency, transparency, of course, changes in the purchase orders, the data that had to be filled in, the implementation of a dashboard that was available for the citizenship so they could monitor and see what were the expenses during the pandemic, and the coordination with entities. Next. I'm not going to talk much about the final reflections because we all know that it's very important for us to adapt ourselves. The message is that for us under this mechanism, it's essential to continue supporting our institutions for combating corruption, giving them a priority and all the means necessary to continue with their operations and be in this under this circumstance or any other. Next one, please. Thank you very much, all of you, for your kind attention. Thank you very much to the lead expert from Chile. Yeah, a very important topic about the operation of the institutions under this pandemic times, that we all have to face things that we never thought we were going to live through, but we see that everything is possible. Thank you very much. Now we shall continue with the presentation of Costa Rica. Good morning, Costa Rica. Good morning, Mr. Chair. I have a little problem with the camera. I can't activate it, but I'm going to start anyway. Costa Rica. Allow me a few seconds. My camera is not working. Today, I will talk about integrity and transparency and public management before the emergency. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. And thank you to all the participants and members of MESESIC and those of you who are with us today through the webcam. Costa Rica is a country of 5 million inhabitants approximately, and the first COVID-19 case was on March 6, 2020. In other words, it's a year since then. To February 2021, the 23rd of February, we had a total of 203,000 COVID cases. And public officers in Costa Rica are 324,000 to December 19. The topics that we're going to be discussing today with regards to the convention are integrity, public transparency, and citizen participation regarding prevention and fight against corruption. National Poll of Prevention of Corruption, established by the General Controllership of the Republic in February 2020, before the first COVID case in Costa Rica, determined that citizens considered that corruption was a problem in their daily life. And also the people interviewed said that corruption was a problem in their lives. 70.5% determined that the people from Costa Rica were very much tolerant, and 4.2% said they were very tolerant to corruption. Next. Before tolerance of corruption and the moment we were going through under pandemic, the decisions took long processes for deliberation, and now they had to be taken in a very short time. That was the reason why we had to promote integrity, to avoid corruption acts, to have information as transparent as possible, and besides that, it was needed to lower the impact of emergency and have agile channels for denouncing. That's why I'm going to talk about 4 specific actions that we had in Costa Rica through 2 control bodies, the General Controllership of the Republic and the Controllership of Public Denouncers, and the Procurator is the audit. These 4 specific actions had to do with reflection spaces. The second, mapping the risks of public institutions. Third, virtual training. And fourth, agile mechanisms for denouncing. The first, the reflection space, it's a space in the web page in the General Controllership of the Republic. Here we see the transparency of the public management before the pandemic. An example of this is Reflection 26 of June 22 of 2020. Up to today, we have had 43 reflections. These reflections are directed specifically to the citizenship and also to public officers. This Reflection 26 has to do with prevention of corruption, strategic action in facing emergency. Here we can see the corruption risks that increased before of the emergency. The administrative contracting had a very big risk because of the overprices for acquiring services, drugs, and the improper use of the exception procedures. Also compliance with sanitary measures, extension, mobilization of human resources, because there's great exposition to bribery. Also, we took into account subsidies and help aids. There's an example of lots of resources destined to subsidy and the high demand. We also talk about the channeling of private resources there is a risk of deviating the funds. Next. Having this risk, there is an integrity management that had to be done, and the proposal was to strengthen the control environment, a culture directed to ethical values, besides transparency and opening of management of public data in public institutions, and the use of IT, and spaces were open of citizen participation where the citizen had to be informed and will and ready to participate by effective denounce. So it was established expressly that the citizens could have access to denounce in public institutions. This was the reflection. Next. And this is the web page where are the 43 reflections.
The second proposal from the controllership was a risk map establishing the level of risk of each institution due to the COVID pandemic. In this risk map, we developed the institutional risk, taking into consideration vulnerability and institutional threat regarding the emergency. 196 public entities were established, and we determined the information by institution, establishing whether they were high, medium, or low risk. Also, the information by sectors. Here we can see that public institutions, we decided vulnerability, threat, and risk. This was the first time in Costa Rica because it was the first time we had established risk map by institution because we had never had a pandemic. This is the web page for the risk map. Then third is the virtual training. That was the third proposal regarding virtual training for public ethics of the Anti-Corruption Agency in Costa Rica. We started we usually have training, but we started with virtual training. They were held with the general direction of civil service, and we started with a virtual training plan where we delivered to the participants basic information on prevention, etc. This plan took into consideration ethics and probity in the exercise of public function, conflicts of interest, duties of the public official to report corruption actions, etc. 2,638 public servants were training. We had no experience in virtual training, but we were able to train this amount of public servants. We also held a virtual course on transparency and fight against corruption to the 10 cities that had the highest corruption risk, according to the controllership office. The fourth proposal was to have an agile mechanism for reports, PEP. And we made available a site on the webpage of the procurator's office where people could report their suits or their reporting. Concrete actions were focused towards increasing coordination of the control organisms regarding fight against corruption, reflection on the challenges and difficulties that come up daily, and to create mechanisms. And to establish the risk map. This was very important because we came up with national strategies and public policies to mitigate corruption actions. And lastly, to strengthen training to public servants in times of pandemic where there is more risk of corruption. This way we could sensitize and prevent. It's premature to speak about lessons learned, but we think that what we have been doing, we're doing well, and we will continue doing this. But we also need to have self-audits that are agile and connected to the pandemic and controlling the acts of the administration. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias a la
Thank you very much for the head expert in Costa Rica. These issues of integrity, transparency, training, we cannot leave these aside. We have to insist constantly, and the risk map is very interesting to determine some focus points where there is possibility of having corruption. Next, we will have the United States representative. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Linda Miller, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee within the United States government. I do not have slides this morning. I will just be speaking about the United States' response to corruption in the pandemic spending. Like every other country, the United States has experienced a huge economic crisis and unprecedented challenges as a result of the pandemic. An effective response required United States lawmakers and agency officials to act quickly while also maintaining safeguards to ensure fraud, waste, and abuse did not undermine our efforts. As part of the US pandemic response, the United States Congress passed in March of 2020 the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act and 3 related pieces of legislation that provided nearly $2.5 trillion in economic relief to individual citizens, loans for businesses, support for hospitals and other medical providers, and economic relief for impacted industries. Given the large amount of money and the need to provide relief quickly, the United States faced new challenges in how to oversee and ensure integrity in these relief programs. To address this issue, the US lawmakers included a provision in the act that created the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, also known as the PRAC. The purpose of the PRAC is to promote transparency and conduct and support oversight of the government's coronavirus relief response and to prevent and detect fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. We are also tasked with looking at major risks that cut across different programs and agency boundaries. The PRAC is not a standalone organization, but rather it's a committee of inspectors general, each of whom is tasked with providing oversight of their specific agency. The CARES Act specifically identifies inspectors general from 9 agencies as members of the PRAC, but the chair may designate additional inspectors general to serve on the committee from any agency that receives funds or is otherwise involved in the government's response. Consistent with the CARES Act, the inspectors general serving on the committee will continue to perform their duties in addition to this work related to the pandemic. At present, the PRAC is composed of 22 inspectors general, including the recently created Special Inspector General for Pandemic Recovery. On the PRAC's website, which is www.pandemicoversight.gov, members of the public can find reports, investigative press releases, and recommendations published by the individual OIGs and the PRAC. The public can also use this website to track how the funding is being appropriated and spent. This includes information on contract spending for pandemic relief broken down by individual states. For us, the importance of that transparency mission, ensuring that the American public has full information about where the money is being spent, is absolutely vital. To understand if we had the specific information that we needed to conduct the oversight, the PRAC commissioned a study to identify how complete the data reported by recipients of pandemic spending is. Our study found that the data satisfies a substantial portion of transparency requirements, but there are significant gaps in those data that limit the PRAC's ability, as well as the other members of the oversight community, in fully understanding the transparency of the spending. We are working carefully with agencies across the government to capture additional information where we can to ensure that we are being responsive to our need in the CARES Act to provide the transparency to the funding. In addition, the PRAC works to conduct data analytics that look across different programs and identify trends or patterns in fraud or corruption that may be present in multiple programs. For example, we are currently looking at something we call multi-dipping, which is where beneficiaries may have applied for funding in different programs that they were ineligible for. And by using data analytics, we can identify individuals who may have applied for multiple programs to which they were not eligible. The data analytics effort that we are building within the PRAC will continue to grow and become a center of excellence where we anticipate being able to allow all of the inspectors general to access the tools as a shared service to create more efficiencies and allow them to do additional data analytics than they would be able to do without the PRAC. The United States would present the model of the PRAC as a best practice. By relying on pre-existing bodies, including the inspectors general, rather than creating a new standalone organization, the PRAC was able to begin fulfilling our responsibilities immediately. The participating IGs in the PRAC already had the necessary legal provisions in place to conduct the oversight. Additionally, existing OIGs were already intimately aware of the specific challenges facing their respective agencies, allowing them to quickly assess and respond to the risks of fraud, waste, and abuse. The PRAC was able to bring those inspectors general together and share lessons learned quickly that enabled oversight to be more effective than it would have been otherwise. The PRAC model is useful for countries with a decentralized anti-corruption framework when it could be difficult to establish a centralized oversight body. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much for having us.
Muchísimas gracias a la representante de Estados Unidos.
Thank you very much for thank you, Linda Miller, representative of the United States, for presenting us these tools that really have really are important in public procurement, because it's clear that the aid has to reach the entities and people who need them, and also it is could be a possible corruption center that can be controlled with this tool. Thank you very much. And we will now continue with the representation from Guatemala. Good morning. Good morning. For Guatemala, this space is very important. We're able to present our successes and our challenges regarding prevention and combating corruption in the pandemic. First, it's important to mention that the response of Guatemala was 4 phases: prevention, containment, mitigation, and reactivation. So first, we declared a state of exception where we closed borders and eliminated different controls in public procurement. And also we had mechanism for accessing goods for a quick response by the state, but also with some controls to prevent corruption. Otherwise, we could have the risk of having the funds used inappropriately. In order to have better tools to prevent corruption, we had the different entities, each within its own competency, had implemented different transparency and prevention of corruption in their entities. Next, the judicial body, they increased the electronic use of judicial activities. For example, a criminal background, consultation, also virtual hearings on the criminal chamber. They implemented a protocol for these hearings, and also to go to try to prosecute all the illegal actions, especially the ones in corruption. These measures, also there was a peace court for these virtual hearings. We also have a web page and applications, and there is an alert, and that way we can address this digital divide so that justice really it reaches every person.
The Commission of Open Government emphasized the promotion of technology in governmental institutions to make possible for the citizenship to be part of this, because it's part of the accountability and control of NGOs, as well as proper channels to potentiate transparency of the public sector. In this regard, we also continue with the implementation of the National Open Government Plan, guaranteeing the citizens' participation in dialogue spaces done in a virtual way. It's worth mentioning that this participatory process in the midst of a pandemic, we had the approval of the 5th national plan that includes prevention of corruption and the promotion of transparency. Together with this challenge as a state we have in the lowering of the digital gap, the use of electronic tools in different state entities, and publication of information in the form of open data. Next. Another entity key in the prevention and fight against corruption is the Superintendency of Tax that allowed the electronic invoicing, tax declaration, and besides continue with auditing of the tax system of Guatemala, having access to the information. The possibility of auditing and monitoring was vital, but it has been especially under the pandemic situation. The General Controllership of Accounts, on its part to prevent the corruption under the pandemic, developed a comprehensive plan that has a possibility the purchases, emergency purchases because of the pandemic. The audits, physical audits, to guarantee that they are in compliance with the technical specifications framed in the different processes of purchasing, and also to know that they were given in the required way. Also, this was done by private institutions and international institutions in other countries that helped us. And there were other situations that the government has allowed for tackling the pandemic. Some criminal denounces have been advanced in this system. The public office on its way has potentiated its system to have denounces in an electronic way, created a web place called iDenounce, and this is an important tool in the perception of corruption, but also of other crimes that could be happening in the midst of the pandemic, especially cases of violence against women, and now they were able to denounce it through the web page. The Presidential Commission Against Corruption also enable its institutional web page where any person providing their ID data in an anonymous way can denounce it, so this can be tackled administratively. This button for alert was enabled in the ministry's secretariat and other institutions. We believe that the promotion of this denounce culture and providing tools during pandemic or any other time are the key times against corruption. And in this sense are directed all the efforts of the public office to facilitate alerts and the presentation of denounces through the web page. And finally, it's worth mentioning that the Presidential Commission Against Corruption has alerts directed to all the executive branches, including certain regulations of general observance for goods and services, with the idea of increased emergency by COVID. This document highlights the importance of the commission of the presidential, but have national norms and what has been provided in the international conventions. Also, the entities of the executive had to publish in their webpage and institutional web pages the actions done in order to potentiate the accountability and to facilitate the social auditing. Here we show some examples of ministries of state that include a list where they publish all the purchases and acquisitions that have done because of the pandemic. So greater challenges is to lower or to make smaller this gap, a digital gap, with all these channels that have been open and that the pandemic has made us do can have access. Every person and not just the privileged one. Challenges of continue promoting that in public institutions publish their information in open data system to facilitate the participation of citizens. Another thing is the anonymous denouncing in order to be able to follow it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the lead expert from Guatemala, who has given us a series of strategies regarding transparency of institutions through the use of digital tools. That, as we've been learning through the different presentations, this has been presented in the great majority of countries. We shall continue then with the presentations, and right now we'll give the floor to the representation of Honduras. Good morning, Honduras. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Year 2020, due to the emergency state because of COVID-19, decreed by the Honduras and acceleration of processes, the directive purchasing was approved. I want to say that it was a great challenge for our EPS to avoid a risk against integrity, as it has well been said by the other countries. Our office accompanied the preventive strategy and maintained the operability, and then it had the constitutional function of surveillance afterwards, issuing special reports providing from special audits and sent to the public office. For this, through their prosecutors could formalize their requirement, their tax requirement through the proper people. The area responsible has prepared a video with audio, which is self-explanatory. So I would ask the technical department to please put on the video. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Un momento, por favor.
Accounts Superior Tribunal, March 5th, the date of when the decree was published, Decree 145-2019.
Tenemos un problemas.
We have technical problems. If you would please allow us a couple of seconds to see if we can reconnect the video with sound.
Presidente, con el respeto.
Mr. Chair, 1 week before it was reported in Honduras the first positive case of COVID-19, the Decree 145/2019 was published that reforms the law, providing access to the concurrent control, providing the opportunity to detect in the moment any irregular situation and correct it, applying the advice function that the law permits. When having the first positive case of COVID-19, the government of the Republic decreed the emergency state, which implied authorization to institutions that are part of the risk management system to have direct procurement of goods and services. Immediately, it was implemented the support and supervision of public resources that had root idea of these plans. It has three phases. First phase, field work, analysis of information required to procurement and contracting of goods. Phase two, support and verification of the process and distribution of food for vulnerable families. Phase three, to having audits afterwards. The product of the first actions that take into account the TSC was able to detect serious deficiencies in the procurement processes done by the COPECO.
Also, as a result of the special investigation in COPECO, they informed the public ministry that with problems of criminal responsibility, they would have, if they, when attending the patients, they would have $2 million and some odd dollars for irregularities. COPECO delivered incomplete ventilators, and they were trying to establish whether they were perfect for conducting these contracting services. So they used mechanical fans of these two different types, although the FDA had said that information on these ventilators. So there was negligence on the purchase. Some did not operate, and some were not received by the hospitals because they weren't good for COVID-19 use. There were some irregularities detected because they didn't have the technical specifications for these patients. And medical staff recommended their not use. Also, the bills did not have the signatures, the appropriate signatures. There was no web page. The information was incomplete. The bills were in the name of another company. These were some of the irregularities that were detected. So TSC sent the report to the public ministry because it's the agency constitutionally authorized to sending all of this information to the courts. So the TSC publicly sent concurrent control, which had to do with the rations and the food for vulnerable families, sending the basic meals. And they noticed that the Directive Council did not approve the sending of this food, and also they had some recommendations to improve this. So they focused on their role in purchasing and in contracting. So when they held direct individual contracting, but then also they reviewed and noted that there would be a special audit that would help the hospital staff. So there were special audits on new portable temporary hospitals and equipment, medical equipment and supplies. Also sending to the customs because these containers were empty. And then when they had the gamma rays, they noticed there was some irregularities. So there was criminal responsibility noted in these different acts. There were irregularities in the purchasing of 7 mobile hospitals with their treatment plants, inconsistencies in acquisition of mechanical ventilators, fans, inconsistencies in the purchasing process of 250,000 trials, tests for COVID-19, use contracting of a family company, inconsistencies in masks, buying, purchasing of masks, and their directive council reviewed the purchasing conducted. So they sent the role of the TSC was considered to be in their national health emergency. The role was to control the use of all the resources.
Muchas gracias a la representación
Thank you
del
for the
representante de Honduras
representation of the head expert from Honduras
manejo de compras
regarding the management of direct purchasing regarding transparency, how it should be. Continuing with the presentations, right now we give the floor to Paraguay.
Experto titular. Experto titular.
Estimada delegada de Paraguay, tiene
The Paraguay delegate, you can turn on your video and your microphone, please, so that we can, so you can continue with your presentation. Thank you.
Muy buenos días.
Good morning. This presentation will be made by a representative of the National Anti-Corruption Agency in Paraguay, and maybe you can enable him to be able to conduct this presentation.
El delegado que se encuentra como participante podría por favor alzar su mano para... Ok, perfecto.
Could you show us? Yes, okay.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
¿Sí se me escucha?
Can you hear me?
Sí, se lo escucha.
Gracias. Bien, buenos días, señor presidente.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning to all the participants and in representation of the Paraguayan state. I would like to be the most orderly and quick and clear in our topic, which is the object of this special session, which has to do with the experiences, developments, and lessons learned by the Paraguayan state with this situation of COVID-19. As Mr. Chair mentioned, and the different experts that have come before me, when we received the notice of the first COVID case, the Paraguayan state took some measures which had to do with restrictions which affected the economy of individuals and therefore the public economy as well. This affected the private and public economies, and it was the best measure to stop the spread of the virus within the Paraguayan state and affecting the population, the general population. Then these restrictions were continued, and this meant that the numbers of people who were infected also increased. So as all the ones have done, we came to a conclusion where there was a conflict on the one side, the economy, public and private, and public health on the other. So the objective of the Paraguayan state and all the states in general was to be able to have some sort of balance between these two legal goods, trying to keep in the best way possible the integrity of private public economy without this generating detriment to public health. That's the scenario within which the Paraguayan state started the measures, which I will show. Following. First, Congress in Paraguay formulated and issued and came into effect, Law 6524, which we colloquially call the emergency law. The law declared the emergency state as declared by the World Health Organization, and the most relevant of this is that it established mechanisms of a tax, financial, and budget nature to face this situation, economic and health perspective. As we can see in this slide, there were exceptional measures, administrative, budget, and tax nature, which has to do with our gathering in this special session. I would like to focus on the second point in this slide, which is the chapter 4 of this law. It was regarding transparency and accountability measures regarding the measures that were implemented by the Paraguayan state, which were efficient and the best to avoid corruption actions and to bring to justice previous corruption actions. So the executive branch regulated this law, and with a decree 3506 of 2020, and the object of this decree, in addition to exceptional measures regarding public procurement, I would like to focus that this decree we brought into the law a figure that had not been in any law in Paraguay, which was an affidavit of, I didn't understand. It meant that all the decision makers, public officials, where they would mention everything. These had to be decision makers who have received public funds regarding the emergency law. In addition to this obligation that was for senior officials, they had to have their sworn declarations or affidavits, and something this way they were allowed to participate in the social area to fight against corruption. In addition, we formulated a web platform. This is what we can see on this slide, which is the COVID-19 module of the Paraguayan investment map. It has a series of information that allows any person to have to trace the allotment of public funds and implementation. That way, through this platform, they can follow the money until the execution of this.
These are aspects of this web platform that, as I said, it's available for everybody. In this web platform, any citizen can have access to all the programs with subsidies, donations, the acquiring of public goods. And something very important to highlight about this web platform is that it has the possibility that a citizen can inquire, can criticize, can do any type of feedback that allow the public officer to answer and amend certain things. Within this web platform, we linked the denunciation portal, anti-corruption, and this allows that the citizen that it's controlling the way the money is going, if it has any suspicion about any expenditure, can do can have that denunciation in an anonymous way or with data protection in compliance with international standards. Next. Next. It's also important to highlight that the control body and with competence to establish norms at the administrative level in Paraguay, it also used technology in order to allow the citizens to control in one way the way the money was going during the public contracting process. It's also good to highlight that the public procurement national direction adjusted to its minimum in corruption regarding public contracting or the acquisition of goods and services. And finally, to end my presentation, it's important to highlight the executive branch of Paraguay established the creation of the special commission for public procurement that has a maximum authorities of control organizations in the state, whose object is to control that the goods to be purchased under COVID do respond in a satisfactory way the demands or proper in order to fight COVID. And besides, this special control commission has the mandate to establish control of the principles for public procurement, publicity, advertising, economy, competence, protection to free competence during the public procurement process. Next. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Muchas gracias a Paraguay en la persona
Thank you very much, Paraguay, head of Federico Garay, especially for the measures taken in the transparency and accountability, and also because of the sworn declaration, which is something new sworn statement that it should be taken into account by all the other countries. Let us continue then with the presentations, and now we give the floor to the Peru's representation. Peru, good morning.
Buenos días, presidente. Muchas gracias
Good
por el...
morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for this space. Nice greeting from Peru, and I hope all of you and your relatives are fine health-wise. This is a space that consolidates dialogue and learning, which is very important in all these processes, especially to learn from the successful experiences of many countries. We need that learning because there's lots of hindrances
Quiero empezar la exposición refiriéndome básicamente
I'd like to start this presentation referring to a
vivimos tiempos excepcionales
phrase. We have exceptional times, and those exceptional times require exceptional measures. Many of us have heard this sentence because of the pandemic requires exceptional measures. These measures we have to be taken in a flexible way and quickly, but could generate some corruption risks that we have to try to avoid. I shall start my presentation directly with the lessons learned. This is the most useful for purposes of sharing experiences in the Peruvian case and also at Latin America level. Something to highlight is transparency. Transparency is not a concept that can be developed in an isolated way. It has to do together with the participation and accountability. These are concepts tied together, and we should propose as a country, as states, mechanisms that allow the feedback of these concepts. Second idea that I think it's quite valid is that transparency is not a unilateral process. It's not just to provide information, but it requires that information, besides being received, understood, and used, and as heard, many of our countries are opting for open data, which is a fundamental measure, but we also have to promote the correct use of open data and the use of that information. The third element that I would like to highlight is that transparency generates effects for the government, and that could be translated into more accountability, and also for the citizen, because it creates legitimacy, trust, and participation. However, we also have to accept that there are administrative traditions and political interests and fear to lose control when we have these transparency processes. Therefore, the design that we should state in developing measures has to be developed in function of who is it directed to, the information, and how it can generate value, because that's what we want, to generate value. The context of the circumstances, the balance points are very important to ensure that everything flows and works. Here, we also have to ensure the right of access of public information. There are some other aspects that part of the development of what has meant to face this problem that nobody was able to foresee. The consequence of some facts that have happened in the Peruvian case are, first of all, the need to develop greater diligence to avoid impunity. When I make reference to this, I mean that we have to exercise a constant follow-up on disciplinary processes and criminal processes of those people who could be involved in the anti-ethical procedures and even corruption offenses. When there are some problems that could be linked to those aspects, it won't be the proper monitoring, and information is lost and does not feed the interest of the expectation of the citizens that require significant shows of what's being done. On that aspect, it's important, and this could be good also for many countries, to develop a campaign to strengthen the duty of denouncing. In the Peruvian case, we are 1.5 million of public office officials. See, if we all develop in a in a thorough way, many facts, many acts won't become so serious, and when opting for crimes, we could stop them before in preparatory acts that have those corruption acts. In the Peruvian case, we are disclosing a campaign about the use of the single digital platform. This is an innovation in the sense that we have standardized a single place for alerts that it's linked to the denounce management, where we have traceability, operation, monitoring, and follow-up. So this is very important to be considered as a contribution. And just to have the proper development when it's linked with the disclosure about the protection measures to the person who's denouncing. In continuous investigations, we found that the problems to make denounces or incentivize to them have to do with fear to problems and lack of information and the consequences these denounces can have. So this is related with the facility to present the information and also the mechanisms to protect the person who's denouncing, and that ensure the option by default, the reserve of identity, encrypt information so the person can know how to progress in this denounce. This platform is standardized and allow us to know in detail the progress. With regards to have risk and management with regards to integrity of public sector, we have to advance in this, associate our interventions to identify vulnerable spaces that will provide corruption acts. Not only this, but to facts or acts that are against the integrity. In the Peruvian case, we are working strongly with the integrity focus. So for us, it's key. Here, we are developing a series of actions, for example, development of documents and norms that are directed to measures that will guarantee the process. For example, just to mention a case, the vaccination process. This is beyond what has been said about the acquiring and the allocation of the budget of great resources. We also have a series of risks at the vaccination process that all our countries are going through. So it's very important to ensure that this process is be analyzed from a risk perspective, identify the risks, and obviously state management that can mitigate those risks. Now, in the case of what we've developed so far, we've established, for example, specific prohibitions of risks identified during the vaccination process, irregular acts, national, international. We've done studies, national, international, to see what are the recurrent practices, the operation way, and we have to strengthen also the duty of denouncing. A decentralized equipment, that's something very important, where we have the main objective is the surveillance, the application of the due diligence of public entities. It's not just to say the public officer, this cannot be done. We have to supplement those measures with a support to public entities in disclosure, orientation, and supervision. Public entities have to ensure an organizational climate guaranteeing that integrity can be defined. Next slide. Now, with regards to the ethical training of public servants in all roles, permanent training to face ethical problems, what we're doing is developing a platform of training directed to all roles, regardless of the level of responsibility. And this is being done based on what has been generated. Last year, we started with a massive course about integrity. 24 academic hours developed with the technical assistance of ENAP. Unfortunately, in the training topics, these expositions or presentations are not standardized. So every time, every entity has to progress as they can. So what we have to do is to talk about a general process that involves all the necessary steps. Another thing that it's being developed is developing a manual directed to authorities and heads of public entities, directed to all the roles of the entity. We have to put in the center of the reform the public sector. Our idea is to have the public change, not only take care of all the problems and just to concentrate in developing their norms. We have to see how can we align those behaviors of our public officers with the objectives we have. And that's why co-responsibility is very important. We want to have a solid alliance with private and public universities in Peru, and also at the Ministry of Education. Together with the universities, we are stating a development directed to next professionals aligned with the development of our country. It's not just to ensure the meritocracy, but we need meritocracy convention with ethics and integrity.
The time is up. Yes, I'd just like to mention that there was an analysis last year, March. We consulted whether the right to access to public information should continue or be suspended, as sometimes happens in emergency situations, but the government was very clear saying that public access to information we cannot stop it. What we most need is transparency and proactivity by the state of providing a quick response to consultations. The rest of our slide show has more information. We have deployed different platforms, open data, accounts. So thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye. Thank you for the Peru expert on access to information, transparency, use of digital tools, platforms, and training and information, which are always relevant and necessary to continue implementation. We will continue with the presentations. We continue with Mexico, but they have just mentioned that they have some technical problems and have requested for us to pass them to the end. So right now, then, we would give the opportunity to Jamaica. Good morning, Jamaica.
Good morning, Mr. President and fellow delegates. It is indeed my pleasure to be able to both attend this 35th meeting of the Committee of Experts, as well as to make a presentation on behalf of Jamaica. Our presentation this morning, though not via PowerPoint, I will be making a verbal presentation on corruption control and mitigation. Good morning again. I'll be making a verbal presentation on corruption control and mitigation in a time of crisis, building effective systems, the Jamaican experience. Jamaica, similar to many other countries, and especially our anti-corruption agency, has not been left untouched by the issues caused by the current pandemic. Nonetheless, as we strive towards the implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, there are certain steps which have been taken to ensure that we are both effective as well as proactive. In so doing, the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged many known norms, inclusive of the general conduct of business within both the private and the public sphere. The Integrity Commission of Jamaica, like many other anti-corruption bodies, has been faced with the stark reality of providing oversight in the award and implementation of government contracts, whilst also ensuring compliance with the systems for registering and declaring income, assets, and liabilities of our public officers and officials during what is currently the most uncertain of times. Our challenges have revolved around the quick pace for which service delivery is expected, if not demanded, while seeking to ensure that the systems of transparency, accountability, and indeed equity hold true amidst the absence of, in some instances, clearly defined rules to treat with the novel circumstances of both social distancing, remote or telecommuting, and the virtual conduct of activities. In many regards, there has been an increase in both the pace of activities directly related to the fight against COVID-19, whilst other less directly related expenditure has been impacted as a result of the delays, which are due to a reallocation of funds or the absence of personnel to facilitate activities such as timely implementation and reporting. This is indeed a concern that the Integrity Commission of Jamaica has faced, if not a challenge. The reality, therefore, which faces many entities within the public sphere, is the absence of the technological resources which would provide the necessary access and mobility to effectively enable telecommuting amongst its staff. Consequently, there are and there remains obstacles to service delivery, real-time access to otherwise readily available information, which is relied upon by the Integrity Commission in its oversight activities. Despite these obstacles and recognizing the Commission's role in the fight against corruption, the Commission has had to embark on a systematic process of innovating while still remaining accessible to our numerous stakeholders. As such, and I'm going to now detail certain of the key actions which have been undertaken to date. Sensitization remains a key priority for us, and as such, we have undertaken numerous sensitization sessions virtually, which are aimed at signaling to all our stakeholders that the Commission remains vigilant, whilst actively providing oversight for both public procurement and contract-related activities, particularly those which are related to the health sector and other key sectors involved in tackling the pandemic. In so doing, the Commission has focused elements of its preventative oversight activities towards proactively reviewing procurement and contract awards, which are directly related to the pandemic, whilst offering virtually the necessary support in terms of application of the rules and procurement guidelines to all public bodies. In relation to other preventative measures as envisioned under the convention, we have also remained vigilant in our asset declaration activities. In this regard, we have developed a decentralized submission facility to ensure that declarants can safely and conveniently meet reporting obligations, and these reporting obligations are required to be made by the 31st of March each calendar year. And as such, these decentralized submission facilities in numerous public bodies have eased the burden and also the realizable fear and health concerns that our declarants might have. But again, it is a proactive measure on our part. Information technology has also been a key aspect of the Commission's work in the last year, as we have actively pursued the development of our information technology systems and processes to facilitate the digitization of our records, as well as remote access to both our staff and to relevant stakeholders. Again, this is to ensure that our business continuity measures are in place and that we'll be able to effectively provide the necessary degree of oversight. The reliance on ICT has continued to be used throughout our organization, and we have also been able to maintain our training sessions whilst we continue to onboard new recruits, bearing in mind the current crises. Another integral move that the Commission has made within the last year is to seek the relevant designation and exemptions for our staff members under what is termed the Disaster Risk Management Act. This essentially affords our staff the ability to execute their official duties as an essential service, and therefore they're not constrained by the restrictions on movement imposed under the requisite legislation. Such a designation was secured in an attempt to maintain again our business continuity and our oversight function and presence to our multiple stakeholders. In summary, and though it is still very early days, the challenges and the lessons learned so far are still being refined. But ultimately, we have recognized that innovation and proactivity is a key component of addressing the challenges stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, given the degree of oversight which the Commission must provide. Partnership, stakeholder engagement is also critical to bridging the gap between pre-existing norms and the challenges stemming from the pandemic. This is particularly so in the absence of clearly defined rules which would govern both electronic means of oversight as well as the conduct of government procurement outside of the electronic procurement platforms. Nonetheless, the Commission has remained vigilant whilst addressing the unforeseen circumstances and remains proactive in this regard. I thank you for affording me this opportunity and remain available for any questions that might be posed. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al experto titular de Jamaica.
Thank you very much for the lead expert of Jamaica. It's always important to control corruption, especially with this quick delivery and transparency of information, as he mentioned. And very important as well to do this through using the technological or virtual tools that clearly have been very important in these pandemic times. We can continue with presentation, so we continue with Uruguay. Thank you, Uruguay. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the presentation regarding this topic, or regarding experiences and developments and lessons learned regarding prevention and combating corruption. Following, please. The obstacles and difficulties which we have found in Uruguay were reinforcing the health system to be prepared to care for a very high number of people who would be affected by COVID-19, adopting measures regarding presence of public servants, and guidance to private companies adopting measures regarding face-to-face, preserving the health of Uruguayan citizens regarding infections coming from abroad, adopting different mechanisms to assist the people who are, to aid people who are unemployed, have a fundamental challenge continuing with education at all levels, initial, primary, secondary, higher, professional, and offer access to the pandemic situation, and to adopt economic measures for the aid and help to Uruguay's inhabitants. Regarding health, solutions that were adopted regarding these obstacles, we have to consider first, well, health. And here we expanded the intensive treatment centers throughout the country through the health service administration. We centralized the information of public and private laboratories with the confirmation of positive cases. We also extended coverture of the state assurance banks to all the doctors in the country. And there was a bill to include COVID-19 as a professional illness. Following. Regarding science and technology, we instrumentalized the application for cell phones called coronavirus.ui. It has free access. It offers georeferencing of cases, reception, and of alert of being exposed, information, and statistical data of the health situation day by day. Second is active participation of academia, scientists, researchers, and the University of the Republic, Pasteur Institute, Clemente Stable Institute. Third, development of molecular diagnostic techniques for detecting the virus. And fourth, creation of an honorary scientific advisory group to deliver and evaluate the different measures made by the government. Next. The GACH, G-A-C-H, is the acronym for the Honorary Scientific Advisor Group, which is formed by Dr. Rafael Radi, coordinator, and different specialists, national and international doctors, advising scientifically the President's Office of the Republic to advise the President's Office starting 16 April towards the new normality. The objective is not only to propose, but also to assess the different measures adopted by the government. Next.
Economy. Under economy, we try to ensure with priority the needed resources to take care of the national health emergency, financing for buying supplies through the public ministry. It was established as a priority, the reserve of resources to fund whatever was necessary to attack the pandemic. The creation of the Coronavirus Fund was fundamental, supported by public bodies' income, the contributions of public positions contribution, the publication by the price consumer defense area and follow-up of a stock of products that are part of the basic purchase from the health point of view and the food, and also extension of due dates for the state collectors' bodies of payment. Diverse sectors that were very much affected by the pandemic, like education, public sports, the travel agency, hotels, etc. With regards to society and work, we have the following. There was an agreement between national government and the departmental government to unify data of everybody that had to be taking care of social policies at national level. Social assistance policies. The time was extended and the creation of new shelters for the vulnerable people, many times out on the streets. Strengthening of the National Institute of Food, INDA, and the strengthening of the amount of social UI card, also for assistance. The delivery of food baskets for 18,000 people supported by social workers. Instrumentation of telework at the public and private level. Flexibility of the use of the unemployment insurance to take into account affected sectors for the partial paralyzation of their activities. It was established, it was created a partial insurance of unemployment, very important. Now, the extension or the of the national health insurance for workers, dependent and independent. For the purpose of to be working as voluntary in certain coordinated actions together with the Public Health Ministry and the Civil Office and HISIC, the electronic government agency that allows that workers can collaborate in taking drugs to elderly people who live alone and that cannot do it by themselves. Education, strengthening of the CEIBAL plan as an education platform to provide education resources, the instrumentation of the online courses in all the subsystems of the Public Education National Administration, to promote access to cultural proposals, national cultural processes in times of pandemic, and to enable the free platform of the Ministry of Education and Culture for children, youngsters, and adults that can receive different programs of visual arts, etc. So which are the lessons learned? Vulnerability regarding pandemic. The main lesson learned by Uruguay, as all the world's countries of the world, they are exposed when traveling from one country to another. To have an effective and transparent situation as a responsible situation with the PPE, very important. It was not an obligation, but it was something that it was promoted for the citizen to be responsible. Changes in the population conduct regarding coexistence and respect, limited economic resources took us to increase solidarity among the people from Uruguay, high evaluation of the scientific community and the need to provide greater economic resources to the different scientific investigation centers, and the impact has generated greater trust and transparency in the information received. What are the challenges? I'm sorry, but your time is up. This is my last slide. This is my last slide. Which are the challenges? The national vaccination plan. March 1st, 2021, we started with the first phase of the vaccination plan against COVID-19. This is destined to the people who are vaccinated, the education workers, police, firefighters, militaries, and workers of the INAO. The vaccination plan will continue with the rest of adults, starting with the greater age until we reach youngsters of 18 years old. If vaccination is not mandatory, the government promoted to be immunized because, according to the president of the Republic, Mr. Lacalle, it's not an individual topic, but it's a topic of responsibility with the community. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you to the lead expert of Uruguay with regards to her presentation. It's very important to say that the honorary scientific group, it's always important to receive information, scientific information firsthand, and then topics like the telework and transparent and effective response at all levels and in all situations. It's that creates a field that it's more far away from corruption and not very comfortable situations. Thank you very much, Uruguay. And now we'll give the floor to Mexico, which will be our last presentation. Mexico, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to greet all the experts in today's meeting. First of all, to say that Mexico is very much aware that this pandemic has implied lots of challenges for all sectors, social, economic, cultural of the country. But however, combating corruption also implies to combat, to prevent those acts that could be given in the public contracting, especially in the health area, in the framework of COVID-19 pandemic, and could try to avoid the abuse of power that could be under this topic. I do thank this space given to me. I'll try to be as thorough as possible, but as succinct as possible too, about what the Secretariat of Public Function has done in Mexico under the framework of COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please, if you can help me. Precisely, March 2020, officially when we start having COVID-19 cases in Mexico, and measures started to contain and to prevent contagious national level of this pandemic, the public secretariat determined that inputs and supplies should be maintained, totally supported and surveilled by all the internal control bodies that this department has. More than 200 institutions that are part of this administration. This with the idea to prevent and combat corruption acts in the health sector and comply, therefore, with the application of our government of guaranteeing public integrity in these processes. So in that regard, and in spite of challenges that we presented because of the social distancing, the measures of work at distance at home, the Secretariat of Public Function, that citizens in their corresponding records will be valid and operating without any interruption, taking into account the importance of maintaining open all the denounced channels for the citizens to be able to have regarding health and security under the framework of this contingency. In this regard, we would like to specifically name some challenges that we had to be able to perform our tasks under the framework of this health contingency. This experience comes from combating possible corruption acts in the public procurement and health sector. This is a trend that not only was at the national level, but also at international level, since precisely it's the public procurement focus of attention with regards to risk of corruption. As such, when there's no pandemic, this implies to strengthen even more these preventive controls for under the framework of a sanitary emergency. In a specific case, the obstacles and difficulties that we had to face during this pandemic, we could pinpoint to avoid activities like the too many personnel in public offices. That was one of the first challenges, to maintain official communication and legal communication of all the departments, since the communications on the paper were restricted because of the distancing and contingency measures of the pandemic. So it could not be done in the traditional way, so of delivering documents and printing documents. That was another challenge, to maintain an effective communication with the society in order for them to know the alternate ways that were enabled for them to denounce. We already had a system and great proportion of denounces had been submitted in a face-to-face way. So the challenge was to able to tell the citizens that we had these spaces through the new IT systems, and to have a greater surveillance in the public procurement under this pandemic. Next. In this regard, we experienced an increase of communication that in the past were done in written. Now they were done through electronic systems, and we were pretty much on top of procurement of public procurement processes. Which were those measures that we implemented? First of all, the main instruction of the public function was that all the internal bodies had to support any process of public procurement in a preventive way. Health, derived from the Constitution, established the emergency throughout the country, and this implied that the great majority of these procedures, in order to have health supplies, had to be done through the direct procurement. That's why we established a support to obtain the best conditions in price and quality for the state in this contracting had to be done under the emergency.
In second place, there were some guidelines for exchange of official information on email. That way, the information was validated as an official communication, although it was not on paper official letter. So this tool was used as official. Also, human resource, administration of human resource throughout the government. The secretary had this function, secretariat. There were scaled schedules for service. There was training at a distance in order to not interrupt citizen services and give continuity to all public services. This meant bringing together the guidelines with our epidemiological lights. If it was red, green, or yellow, and that way we improved the measures of face-to-face or intensified the house work. Also, the comprehensive citizen complaint system was strengthened. Following. Yes, thank you. The actions that were developed by these internal control bodies, OIC, in addition to preventive accompaniment or support, was also is supporting the contracting processes. And that way we could follow up the purchasing, the procurement, starting from planning and all those purchases to counter all the COVID effects. We were able to have a lot of preventive measures to control irregularities. Also, there was verification of information on the registries of the network of purchasing, Compranet, which also had government information regarding procurement. Especially the data there, we could check if there was any irregularity in it. Also, we established in these OICs different visits to verify if there were fans, procedures for general procurement for services by the purchasing agencies, and by buying also used equipment. We also had roundtables, working groups for these goods and services and their contracting. And also in the health area, we supported the COVAX multilateral purchasing tool, and where the National Institute of Health of Mexico with the purchasing agency, making sure that there was transparency in these purchases. Also, the public function is the guarantor of public service, especially in this pandemic. We have continued functioning. We have supported more than 1,000 purchasing processes for more or less 9 billion Mexican pesos. And that way we are trying to make sure that the pandemic is not an excuse for not providing good services, especially in health. And now with the new ethics, we're trying to, on the part of the providers of these goods and services, if everybody who has tried to speculate, they have been investigated and they have been sanctioned. Your time is up. Yes, I am closing with this. The public function has not allowed this pandemic to be an obstacle to follow up on the complaints, and especially with corruption. And they have had some declarations, had some opinions, and they try to use the ICTs as best as possible. Also strengthening training to public servants regarding procurement, and also identifying new risks in acts of corruption. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the lead expert in Mexico providing us with that information regarding surveillance and prevention in public procurement, with the support, which is very important, and also adapting citizen complaint in Mexico. With this would be the last presentation for this special session of prevention and combating corruption for lessons learned. It's important to note that how different countries have mentioned in their different modes how they have taken control of public procurement and public expense. They have to be efficient, effective. The institutions have to be adaptable. And from one moment to the next, we had to change from being face-to-face to being virtual, using digital tools and electronic, and also insisting on training, information, accountability, because all of this helps to reach transparency, and where there is transparency, there is less corruption. These are all elements that we can take away from these states, from these presentations, and which we can take as something, our takeaway for this special session. This is the end of the special session. Thank you all, participants, and all the people who have connected on the webcast in order to listen and to see how the different countries have been able to sort the situation, that have been able to be in, to attend to the situation of the pandemic. So we can conclude this special session, and with the time, we can say we are concluding the morning session of the 35th meeting of experts. For the afternoon, has the consideration of the methodology for indicators to considering the system of indicators to prevent, detect, and eradicate impunity for acts of corruption. The idea is to analyze and approve it. We won't be discussing in the information because we are using this methodology, because it would be too big. So we're using this methodology, which would be more quick looking at the indicators. We have also been analyzing the possibility of having some time left over this afternoon, and we might continue with the point 7 of the agenda, where we would consider with the recommendations of the committee. That way the experts can bear this in mind and are not surprised the moment we reach that moment, that possibility. There we have a notice to present regarding candidates for president, for chair and vice chair. We had given this time for today, until today, to present candidates. So we are reminding all that this is still pending, so that you bear this in mind. Without further ado, I don't know if Jorge does not have his hand raised, so then we can consider the morning session and conclude it, and we will meet at 2 p.m. Washington time. And I'd like to thank especially the technical secretariat that generated this space of this special session, and which was very important and informative on the situation of the countries that we have many takeaways for our states. Thank you all very much, and we will see each other in the afternoon.